Performance wise, and this is probably the biggest thing about the specific iPad, it has that Apple A12 Bionic chip like I already stated, but it only has 3 gigabytes of RAM, and that specific RAM portion of this whole entire, thing is probably the biggest problem with this specific device. Again, if this thing had, 4 or 6 gigs of RAM, I would have set it up better, but the 3 gigs of RAM this thing has pretty much puts it at the same type of performance as something like an iPhone XR. It's still, I don't think, as good as something like an iPhone XR in my opinion, mostly because, it has a high resolution, screen. But even other than that, I think this whole entire iPad is perfectly fine depending on your situation. Now, what I'll tell you is this. If you are an owner of this iPad, or if you're planning on getting an iPad, basically you need to understand the type of user you are. If you're the type of user that, expects everything from an iPad like it's your main desktop in a way, you don't use a MacBook or iMac or anything like that, your iPad is your machine, this is the type of situation that I would probably say, you can get a lot of stuff done with an iPad, but it still is going to be limited in some portions. Now, if you're a student or something like that, and all you do is type papers, write notes and stuff like that, I think an iPad Air 3 is going to be perfectly fine. You have to also consider the fact that this iPad supports the Apple Pencil. Not the second generation, but the first generation, which I still think is perfectly fine for a lot of people, and that is a huge advantage for this type of iPad. If you can go and write down notes and highlight stuff and move on and so on and so forth, you're going to be setting yourself up for success with an iPad, in my opinion. That's a weird way to put it, but you're going to be in a better situation than not. But if you're trying to go and do everything on an iPad, such as video editing, coding, doing this, doing that, and, holding a lot of those apps in the background, you're going to be running into the issues with the RAM management. It will probably be able to play those games and it'll go ahead and, open everything just fine. Again, this thing almost has the same chipset as the iPad Pro, 3rd generation and 4th generation for the most part, but the RAM is the biggest separating factor. Because it only has 3 gigs of RAM, you're only going to be able to hold so many apps in the background before it restarts. So to give you an example, if you're in the middle of typing up a paper on your iPad and you go to, load up another app and you want to go multitask between 2 apps and you're taking things from one app to the other and all this other stuff, well, you don't want your, document that you're working on originally to restart the app, because that would be really annoying. Chances are your work is saved, but you're going to have to go and click on that same document and open it up and all that stuff and get to the point where you were. If the more RAM you have, the better you are. And with an iPad Pro 4th generation, or with even a MacBook, you're going to be setting yourself up for a better situation. So that's one way to put it. Performance-wise, it just depends what you're trying to do with it. If you're a baseline user, I would say like an average user, the iPad Air 3 is going to be perfectly fine. But if you're somebody who needs to expect a lot more from an iPad and you're trying to replace a MacBook with it, and you do more than just, writing documents and stuff, you're going to have a hard time doing that with an iPad Air 3 specifically. An iPad Pro's 4th generation will be better, but because of the RAM thing with the iPad Air 3, is definitely not my favorite, substitute for a MacBook in my opinion. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up.